If you've ever been to Europe, or even if you haven't, you probably know that we are a continent full of languages, cultures, and many different traditions. And here in Slovenia, I think we managed to live just a bit slower than in some other Western countries, although that too is slowly changing, unfortunately. But lately in my homemaking, I've been trying to bring back some of the habits I remember from my grandma. So the little things she used to do, the foods and drinks I grew up with, and just the overall slower pace of life. Honestly, as a kid, I just wanted to be cool. And even in my teenage years, a lot of her frugal habits felt a bit silly at the time. But now I find myself wanting to do exactly those things. So today I'm taking you along as I bake a cherry strudel, make myself a cup of coffee in my beloved cafetiera, and prepare some elderflower syrup, which, by the way, makes an awesome drink, and you'll find it on just about every summer picnic table here in Slovenia. So I hope you enjoy coming along with me. I love watching homemakers from other countries, seeing how they create that sense of home in their own way. And it turns out, no matter where you're from, we're often chasing that same feeling and building a life that just feels warm, grounded, and overall making our houses or our apartments or anything a proper home for our families. By the way, it was Sunday when I was filming this, and Sundays here are different from other days of the week. Most people try to relax and spend some time with their families before the week starts again on Monday. All the stores, apart from the gas stations and maybe a couple of big pharmacies, are closed, and it's considered pretty inappropriate to contact anyone about anything business related, and we take that very seriously here. And it's not just a social thing, there are actual laws in place about it. At least where I live, it's literally against the law to make a lot of noise on Sundays. Not everywhere in Slovenia is like this, it varies by region. But in my city, if you make too much noise, someone will probably report you for disturbing the peace. So, yeah, if you want to mow the lawn on a Sunday, you probably can't. It's not allowed. Even if you really want to get something done, it has to be something you can do quietly. And sometimes that forces people to work a bit less and take some time off from constantly doing something. Those beautiful cherries you see here are actually from my husband's uncle. So every summer we know we're going to get a whole lot of really good cherries from him. And that's something I really love about life here as well. People still like to grow things. A lot of people will grow one particular fruit or vegetable they really like, and they grow a lot of it. Not to sell it or make money off of it necessarily, but simply to give it away to extended family if they can afford it. So one thing I learned from my grandma, when there's an abundance of fruit and you can't eat it all, you make strudel. So that's what I was making on this day. Okay, so the cherries are all pitted, and that took almost an hour, but it will be worth it in the end. And the dough is rested. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch the dough as thin as possible. You can't really go too thin, and you really want to go thin enough, because if you don't, there will be doughy parts in the strudel, which we don't want. So really do your best, and you'll hopefully end up with a dough that is stretched thin and there isn't too many holes in it. It's like no big deal if there are holes, but just make sure there aren't too many. But we're going to roll it up, so a hole here and there is no problem. The recipe for strudel is mostly the same, no matter what fruit you use. You can fill it with cherries, like I'm doing today, or with apples, or with pears. The only real rule is that the fruit can't be too watery. So, for example, you can't really make strudel with something like peaches. But surprisingly, you can make strudel with zucchini. If you grate them and squeeze out the liquid, maybe fry them in a bit of butter, you can add them in strudel, no problem. But usually we will add some apples there as well, just to make it a bit sweeter in this case. Other than that, strudel is super flexible. I think it's kind of our version of pie. Like in the US, as far as I know, you can pretty much put anything in a pie and people will be happy. And it's the same here with strudel. I'm going to ditch the rolling pin now because it can only stretch the dough so much, I feel like, and I'm going to just continue stretching it by hand. So I think the easiest way to do that is to just go under the dough and kind of stretch it with your hands. It will start to get really thin. You'll almost see through it, but that's what we want. And like I said, I think it's better to have one hole more and the dough really thin than it is to be really afraid to stretch it and then end up with a really doughy strudel. Another thing that's worth pointing out is that while it's okay to flour the surface so that the dough doesn't stick, you almost want it to stick just a little bit because it will be easier to stretch. Because if it sticks a bit on one side, then you can stretch it more from the other side, if that makes sense. Someone woke up from their nap, so it seems like I'm going to have some company finishing this strudel. And honestly, I rarely do anything alone these days, so it's going to be just fine. Aneti. I'm just using some sourdough breadcrumbs here. This step is optional, but generally, the more wet you expect your fruit to be, the more breadcrumbs you need to put in the strudel to kind of absorb all that liquid. I mostly just eyeball how much I need. You can't really go very wrong with it. And the more you make strudel, the more you learn which fruit needs a bit more breadcrumbs or a bit less. I didn't want this strudel to be soggy, so I'm putting quite a lot on here. Then I'm just sprinkling over the pitted cherries and adding some sugar. And I've also added some ground walnuts this time, mostly because the expiration date was approaching and I wanted to use them up. But they basically serve the same purpose as breadcrumbs. They'll absorb a bit of liquid and they just add a nice flavor. Usually for strudel, I would grate some butter over everything to finish it, but since I already used walnuts, which do add some richness, I skipped the butter this time. One thing I've been meaning to address for quite some time now, but there just wasn't a good moment to include it in any other videos, and today feels like the perfect chance, is that a lot of people assume when they watch my videos that I am a stay-at-home mom. And while I totally understand why it might seem that way, people usually just don't take into account how great our country is when it comes to parental leave. So here in Slovenia, every woman gets 105 days of paid maternity leave. That gets a little less paternity leave, but then we have something called parental leave, which can be shared between both parents and lasts for 320 days. So if you do the math, that means in most families, dads will take a couple of weeks off when the child is born and then go to work, while moms usually stay home with the baby for at least a year after the birth. So they are first on maternity leave and then on parental leave. And during that time, your job is protected and you still receive the majority of your salary, so around 90%. And once that time is up, if you decide to go back to work, you actually have the option to work part-time. So basically, if you have a child who's not yet in school, so under 7 years old, you can work part-time and your employer pays for the time you're working, and then the state pays for the hours you're not because you are home taking care of your child. By the way, what I'm showing you here are wild strawberries. I think they're very, very underrated everywhere, so I really wanted to show them. I don't ever see them in most of the videos I'm watching, so I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with them, but basically they are the wild version of a strawberry plant. They don't need a lot of care because they do just grow in the wild, while I think normal garden strawberries do not. So you can find them in the forest like you would find wild blueberries, for example. But the thing that's so great about them that they are so flavorful. You can't even imagine if you've never had them. Imagine all the flavor of a big juicy strawberry packed into a tiny little berry. They're so flavorful. And they actually grow here on this rocky patch of grass right next to our house. And they were here even before we built the house, actually. So we just kind of make sure there weren't any bushes casting shade on them. And we started favoring them a little when pulling weeds out. We didn't really water them or anything like that, but we did make sure they had the conditions to grow. And now there's only more and more of them each year, and I love that we have them right there because it's such a joy for those few weeks when they bear fruit. And they're just so fun to pick. And like I said, you don't really get full from them because they are so very tiny, but you get all the flavor. Now, another awesome plant that grows a few steps away from our house is the elder tree. You've probably heard of elderberry syrup before, and it's delicious. And it's not unusual to make it here in Slovenia, actually. But the thing we make even more often is elderflower syrup, which is basically a very sweet concentrated syrup that you make from just soaking elderflowers in some water when they are full of pollen and in full bloom. So you let them soak for about a day, and then you drain them, you mix a lot of sugar into that water, some citric acid as well, bring almost to a boil, and you get this really flavorful syrup that you can then use as you would use any kind of other fruit syrup. So you only need a little when you're making yourself a glass, and you pour a lot of water over it, and you get a very refreshing summer drink that way. There are a few things that you can add in it to make it a little more unique or a little more yours. Elderflower syrup is one of those things where kind of every housewife has her own spin on it. Some add a bit of lemon, others add other spices, but in general it's just elderflower water, sugar, and citric acid. I'll leave the recipe for elderflower syrup and also for the cherry strudel down in the descriptions below, or you can just use the search function on my website, stretchandfolds.com, and you'll be able to find them anytime. And I really encourage you to give it a try. It's one of those low-effort, homemade things you can make and enjoy instead of a fizzy drink or juice in the summer, and a lot cheaper too. Sometimes people think that living simply is outdated or boring. And like I said, I used to think that way too, especially when I was younger. It's definitely not easy to live slower in a world that's constantly speeding up. But honestly, I think simplicity is one of the most powerful choices you can make. Because when you live simply, you're the one in charge of your life. You have to be intentional with your time, with your energy, where it goes, how it's spent. Living simply means choosing to slow down, even just a little, even when everything around you says you have to rush, you have to be productive, check off a list. And I think in Western culture, we've kind of lost the joy of the process in everything. You know, everything is about the outcome these days. But the process matters too. Not everything has to be constantly optimized or made more efficient. And let me be clear, you don't have to go all in. You don't have to hand make everything. I'm definitely not hanging laundry outside, for example. I tried it, I really did. I know some people love it, but I do love my dryer. So I'm so thankful for modern conveniences like the washer and the dryer. And even then, our laundry basket always seems full. But maybe you enjoy the process of making something in the kitchen. Maybe you like sewing something from a piece of fabric. That's the whole point. It's not about doing everything from scratch. It's about just noticing what brings you joy and leaning into that. Some of my most cherished childhood memories are just being around my parents or grandparents or my family while they were doing something really mundane. And that always reminds me why mundane is, or at least it can be, so important. So maybe just go do something unproductive today and preferably chat with your family while you do it. I'm really curious, what's your favorite mundane thing to do? And maybe tell me where you're from, because I feel like those two things are often very connected. Otherwise, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!